Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 5th Prague Process webinar. Good morning from Vienna and good afternoon to those of you joining us from further afar. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Prague Process Secretariat at the International Center for Migration Policy Development. My colleagues Julia Sobotska and Irina Lusak are here with me today, and of course Andrea Salvini, who will be our speaker for this final webinar before our summer break. I am also grateful to our translator and our technician at Basis Production, and I hope that you will all enjoy this interesting session. Our previous webinars mostly focused on the COVID-19 pandemic and its implications for migration, but today we would like to also pay attention to another topic, and I'm very glad that Andrea agreed to have this webinar with us today. The webinar will be recorded. All our previous webinars are available at our website. Their recordings can be viewed in full length and also a shorter version which only contains the speech of our speakers. Irina Lusak will later on guide you through the question and answer session in the second half of this webinar. For asking your questions in English or Russian, please use the chat function. I would also advise you to please choose the language, your preferred language, either English or Russian, in order to not be irritated by the second language channel. Today's webinar is titled Maximizing Labor Migration Outcomes in the Prague Process Corridors, Practices on how to benchmark countries of destination. I am very happy to welcome participants from over 25 states, as well as international organizations, the European Commission, OSCE, the Eurasian Economic Commission, and many more. Andrea Salvini is an Italian national based in Budapest in Hungary. He has nearly 20 years of experience as a policy practitioner, labor migration specialist, economist, and employment and skills development expert. He has an extensive track record in providing strategic, policy and legal advice at the nexus of employment, migration and skills policies to various governments and international organizations. His geographic expertise ranges from small Pacific islands throughout Asia and the European continent. He has extensive experience in managing and navigating sensitive policy processes with the involvement of high-level national, regional, and international stakeholders. Andrea holds a Master of Science in Economics from the University College in London. He is a lead expert to many international projects, including with the International Organization for Migration or the International Center for Migration Policy Development. I am very happy to give the floor to Andrea and wish you all a very pleasant and successful session.
I repeat from the beginning, good morning to everybody. And thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. And thank you very much for this opportunity to share some insights on the work that we have been doing in the past with colleagues and friends from all over the world. Today, I would like to talk about practices on assessing outcomes to improve migration corridors. Usually, we always think from the perspective of countries of origin, what are the criteria, what are the parameters that maximizing the outcomes of the migration experience, both for the individuals, the state, the families, and the community. I will then share some empirical insights on these classification exercises that we are doing for some origin countries in the Asia and in the African continent. And finally, also to catch the attention, the interest of participants from countries of destinations, we are trying to reflect on some new emerging trends, both relating to the challenges brought about COVID-19 in the short term, and how these align with some skills development insights relating more to the long trend. So I hope that I raise the interest of you, and I look forward also for the discussion after. So the first part, what are migration outcomes for countries of origin? Let's try to look at, for example, European states, which are usually hosting migrants as destination countries. So let's try to see them from the perspective of the countries of origin. So the first issue is that for whom a migration outcome is an amenity. So when we benchmark outcomes, we always think them as an amenity. So the political economy aspect is who benefits from what. So there are there are outcomes from the migrant from the family left behind, outcomes from the government of the country of origin. For instance, the limitation of brain drain or the releasing of unemployment vis-a-vis, for instance, a migration that maximizes remittances for the family or wage for the migrant itself. The second issue is that we try to benchmark these outcomes based on three key criteria. So the first one is feasibility. I mean, how can we make migration happen? Is it feasible to send people to a country of destination? Second is quality, meaning how much the individual migrants get out of the migration process, and we will see what are the parameters in a framework of analysis that does not only look at the numeraire of financial outcomes, but also at the idea of decency of work within the migration experience. And finally, also desirability. This is something that we learned talking step by step with governments of countries of destination. More and more, they are interested to select the segment of the population intending to migrate. Hence, we understand by advising countries of origin that they have a preference in the kind of skill segment of the vacancy they want to tap on. Let's try to see from the very beginning the idea that, I mean, the outcomes of the migration outcome are the most heterogeneous. For instance, in this slide, I try to show how education, which is often promoted by the economic literature as the key determinant, one of the key determinants for the outcome in the labor market, is only part of the story when it comes to migration. So we see two migrants on the left side of the screen and on the right side of the screen with the same level of education, both entering a labor market of semi-skilled jobs, but ending up into very different situations. So the manual example is on the right side, a migrant working in the hospitality sector. We can see that he's working as a waiter, very likely to benefit de jure and de facto from the protection of a labor code that protects him both on paper by the law and also in the practice by allowing, for example, to be unionized or so on. On the left side, we see instead a domestic worker is also required to have a semi-skilled level of competence to access this job, but ending up in an atypical working condition of domestic work in which she may probably experience compulsory deductions of the wage, withdrawable payment, and even at times, given that she lives and works in the same place, we also have the likelihood that she may be in condition of forced labor. So education is not only the yardstick that we consider. Now, the work on which the findings are built, collected, are very much linked to specific recruitment channels. And let's see what are the parameters that we have seen matter the most in ending up in a good migration experience. First of all, the country of destination, mostly linked to specific recruitment channels. We see, for example, that those countries in which which nationals and migrant workers are benefiting from the same labor code and benefiting from, for example, the same collective agreements and the same benefits of tripartite negotiations, are likely to be in a better position than in those countries in which there are double standards. The type of jobs classified as low-skilled, semi-skilled, high-skilled, and professional. This matter, I mean, not only the education and the supply side experience of work experience of the migrants, but the job it ends up in. Finally, the educational attainment and the TVET qualification from the supply side of the out migrant before departure. Now, let's look at the first pillar of migration outcomes. Well, first of all, we look at the in-migration systems. For the in-migration systems, we are talking about the admission policies, the labor approval processes, and other anecdotal evidence able to enrich the analysis. Okay, so the channels, the rules of the regulation, the rules of the game regulating the entry of migrants. Second, the country of destination needs of low and semi-skilled labor. Usually this is determined by the demographic of the labor market. If a labor market in the country of destination is aging, it is more likely that it will attract labor force from abroad. Second, the employers have difficulties in recruiting from the local labor market. This may depend on how attractive are local vacancies for the national population, or in general, the availability of nationals to get the jobs that are set out by the market. Second, how do we benchmark migration outcomes? Quality. Well, the first aspect here is the working and living condition of foreign workers. So first, we have de jure, all workers are covered by the same labor code and benefit from the same collective agreement. Second, how provisions of the labor market are enforced. So this is quite critical because migrants are overrepresented in those sectors and occupations where tripartite instruments are weaker, in which protection is more difficult to be enforced. So again, what the kind of quality benchmarks that are true for the labor market as a whole or for the nationals may not also end up in a better protection for migrant workers. Then we have done a quite interesting work on how to look at not only wages, but wages as one of the determinants for remittances prospect. The states are very much interested into it. So we try to control the wage for the cost of living as a measure to proxy the money remitted home. So basically we have an indication not only of how much the worker gets, but what are the compulsory deduction, what are the open costs, and what are the living costs, to understand how much the country of origin and the family left behind benefit monetarily from migration. Now, desirability, this is a very interesting aspect also for the state. We see that states of the countries of origin are becoming picky in selecting and sorting out the priority for those who are out migrating. So integration prospect vis-a-vis circularity of migration. Some countries are very happy if the out migrant will settle for good in a country of destination. Usually we see that there are a range between 12 and 16 years in which the out migrant is connected to the country of origin. Some other countries instead are very much interested in the circularity of migration. So in the way to which after the migration spell, the migrant is likely to come home with savings, money, and the skills that the endogenous development of the country of origin needs. Well, another issue of desirability is very pragmatic. I mean, countries of origin are very characterized by youth bulge, by labor surpluses. So sometimes they need to create out-migration opportunities for those segments more exposed to unemployment. Very key, and also linked to the point number 5, they want to limit brain drain, also in the very short term. And this is very much linked to the care economy. So to those sectors in which the country of origin has to operate education services, health services, and other services related to service to the persons. So the limitation of the brain drain, and slowly, very slowly, also the idea that in the midterm, they will get back skills, so they will get a brain gain from migration. Finally, very important, geographical and cultural proximities. So usually we see that countries of origin have a quite clear idea in mind of the countries they want to partner with. And this relates also to a common view of the world, to communities and societies where their cultural values can be represented. And also countries and governments that are historically linked by diplomatic ties or by other kinds of trade and economic connection. Now, let me turn to the second part in which we also try to see how different countries of origin from all over the world perform in terms of these classification criteria. So the first slide is about structural labor shortages. So we try to look at some measures of dependency of the population. So we try to see how many people are employed over the persons outside the working age population. This is a very good measure because it looks at how many people are actively engaged in economic activities, the employed, over the kind of people who are not, but not only who are not, but who are also exposed to benefit from care economy services, mainly children and the elderly. We also looked at not only the variation statically in a certain observation 2019, but we also try to understand how much and how fast each country of destination is entering a dependency phase. Now, the second part is very much about jobs opening by skills requirement. So we have now projected on this chart the forecasted job opening by skill requirement in 5 EU countries, taken from CEDEFOP work and elaborated by myself to understand not only what types of job openings we have, but the magnitude of job open, the stock, the number of job opening that we have, because size matter. When you, of course, for example, here we see the labor market of Denmark, which is very attractive because we have very high wages, very important possibilities to maximize monetary benefit, and also the presence of employment protection legislation. But somehow for the country of origin is easier to enter a market like Poland or Romania, which is larger in size. And so we see that Poland, I mean, due to farm and construction and manufacturing labor market needs, rank very high, together with Romania, Portugal, and Czech Republic. I have to say that in the initial screening requested by countries of origin, countries in the Prague Process region are very much, countries of destination in the Prague Process region are becoming very appealing to countries all over the world. Now, let's see now in the market of semi-skilled, how do we benchmark occupation? Again, I try to make a visual representation of these opportunities, trying to combine the type of vacancy in the semi-skilled occupation together with the size, to how many jobs are brokered out by the labor demand. So we see that the highest in absolute and relative term are market-oriented skilled agriculture worker, followed by personal service and care workers, drivers and mobile plant operators, building and related trade workers, and finally also a space in the manufacturing sector with metal, machinery, and related workers. Now let's move to the low skilled. Low skilled, very important, because somehow migration is perceived by countries of origin all over the world, not only as a way to cash in money in the short term, but also a way to retrain workers, to retrain people in their population, in their economy, without having to shoulder the costs of retraining. So again, agriculture ranks the highest, with approximately 500,000 workers in demand over the period 2018-2026, followed by cleaners and helpers. So this kind of workers linked to the domestic work sectors and services, but without the requirement of a TVET certificate to perform their duties. This is the difference between the definition of low-skilled and semi-skilled workers. Well, again, mining, construction, and manufacturing workers are very important, together with refuse workers and food preparation assistants. Again, here we combined these quantitative numbers with some qualitative research in which we try to understand what are the key determinants behind the numbers. And in the low-skilled occupation, what makes the real difference is the language barrier. It looks like that workers in jobs in manufacturing require a very basic knowledge of the language, together with certain forms of core skills such as attitude and motivation, because the factories, establishment all over the world works in the language of the country of destination. Now, we have also tried to benchmark, to look at to what extent there are integration prospects for permanent settlers. And here we see that Portugal ranks the high, followed by New Zealand and Denmark. And we see that we have the Czech Republic, Romania, and Poland ranking higher in terms of anti-discrimination, for instance, with Romania, and also in terms of Poland, in terms of family reunion. Lower values are instead registered for labor market mobility and long-term residence. Now, wages and remittances, this is the kind of analysis that I have described before. So first, we look at the average annual wage, and then we look at the living costs, which have to be shouldered by the migrants. Another interesting exercise that it's still in its cradle, but we understand that it's the one that interests the most countries of origin, is a diagnostic classification of in-migration systems. So the rules of the game, what are the parameters of the rules of the games, of the laws and regulations which are regulating admission, which are regulating entry in the country in the countries of destination. So we have the presence of temporary visa, the skills shortage list, and the presence of an employers-based system. Very important here to understand that what is very much valued by countries of origin is a quite diversified system of visa, so that the different migration pathways can benefit from a visa system that suit the kind of recruitment channel. Second, we have an extensive literature, also thank you to the World Bank and to the ILO, on the analysis of migration costs. So migration costs are now parameterized with travel costs and excessive recruitment fees, whereas the informal costs, the irregular costs, which are relating to the symptoms of human trafficking, such as over-indebtment, such as deception, contract substitution, and other yardsticks, are put in the risk factors, which are, of course, the risk to deception, contract substitution, debt bondage, and the risk to labor exploitation. I had prepared a summary trying to summarize the different kind of recruitment cost in a country where there is a regular migration system in place, and such as, for instance, the countries in South Asia, and more in the countries of destination of the Prague Process, in which there is we remember that Poland in 2019 issued more than 1.1 million temporary visas, so people can enter for labor issues. Vis-a-vis countries, for instance, where admission is made by regularization. So people enter with tourist visas, or they enter with visas for other purposes, and only after a certain time they are regularized. I try to go fast. I really hope that I'm not losing your attention. We are also working with my team to parameterize in-migration systems based on other parameters. So first of all, on the trade-off between the incidence of regular migration channel vis-a-vis the quality of migration. And you see on the right side channel the risk of deception vis-a-vis the stringency of the in-migration system. Now I enter in the part that I hope, I expect will raise more issues for discussion. So these are some policy reflections for the EU countries of destination, among which there is a group of our countries, the Prague Process, and also some snapshots on what I have experienced in government consultations relating to COVID-19. Now, so recruitment, what do we say? Well, we see that it's very effective to study occupational families. Occupational families, one separate from each other. And why? Well, because if you study an occupational family, you are able also to grasp demand, which is across sectors. And usually, the unit of reference is the local labor market, in which there are 1, 2, 3 sectors composing the industrial district that quantify the demand for labor. This I quote two professions which are very much high in demand and relate to the demand of labor of many sectors. One is forklift operators, and the other one is numerical control machine operators. Another issue that we have seen is the need to diversify a visa system, either in the direction of relaxing it or in the direction of tightening it. But the more applicants and employers, the more type of visas employers and applicants can resort to, the more we are likely to reduce the gap between the jure situation envisaged by the law and the experience seen in the reality. Again, recruitment is a very good word to read the migration channel. Let's talk about amnesties. There were proposals for amnesties both in Italy and Portugal. We have experienced, now we have quite a quite good evaluation of the experience of the amnesty in Morocco. So which amnesties work? Where amnesties are effective, and how to avoid that amnesties have an unintended negative consequence, such as promotion of regular migration. I mean, this deserves a webinar by itself. To what extent we are serving employers and workers in regularizing their situation. and to what extent or the presence of labor market institution will allow for the amnesty to be or not to be an instrument that provides incentives which are unintended. I can elaborate if there are some participants more interested in this kind of migration policy tool. Another important what we learned is that the lessons learned from amnesties should be drawn sector by sector, and we will see if we have a specific interest. Now, let's look at again what we have seen after 2015. We have seen some difficulties in countries of destination, in especially, I mean, I'm referring here in Western Europe and in the NAFTA region. There were difficulties to combine humanitarian support with labor market integration. Very interestingly, in a very interesting way, we saw that the language barriers were more important than what we expect. Labor markets require workers to have a certain proficiency, even a specific occupational proficiency of the language they speak. We have seen, so language barriers are, in my opinion, one of the big elephants in the room. Sometimes we talks about a very articulated classification of skills, of demand, but the language barrier, to be able to communicate in the language in which the establishment operates, is key, and it cannot be learned with a 24-hour course. 24-hour because it's the number of hours required to get the patent for forklift operators, which is a very good job. Second, alphabetization barrier often are occupation specific. So what we did not work enough, I think, is in understanding which kind of language skills workers in the low and semi-skilled sector require to perform the job duty. I think that this is a very interesting area of development with in migration, because a certain proficiency of language, the case of Bangladesh or Pakistan, showed that can be learned as a pre-departure service. Second, cost of integration higher than expected. This is something that we can elaborate further. And we don't have final findings on that, but this is what I sense, at least from the big giant governments in Western Europe. Now, let's talk about COVID. What did we see happening? I mean, many migrants went back to their country, leaving segment of the population unattended in terms of labor needs, meaning these countries will have to recruit either domestically or, again, from abroad, workers to sustain their economic system. Second, segments of the economy not elastic to business cycle will continue to require labor even if they are in recession. The kind of personal care service which is very high in demand will not decrease as a result of an economic recession. Employers and HR managers are still dazed. I mean, I ran a survey on the recruitment implications after COVID, and the main findings is panic among CEOs and among HR managers. So somehow the trend now, apart from the agricultural sector, in which we need to support the harvest of 2020, we see the recruitment issues frozen with the halt of the production. But we see that among the many different type of recruitment methods, they wanted to invest in the post-COVID time in a referral system. So in a system of recruitment in which there is a skin in the game. Migrants confirmed to be those more exposed, not only to the usual sources of violation of human and labor rights, but also to the specific risks of COVID-19. And we saw the meat processing case or the testing results in Singapore, where 85% of the infected were non-national citizens. EU economies are now tied in a double threat with the presence of labor migrants. I mean, we understand that EU economies cannot operate without migration. How labor market will adjust in time of recession, and especially how the demand for migrants will be taken into consideration with the issue of high unemployment, how the nationals in the EU will be able to take jobs which were considered not attractive before. Finally, we see agriculture and care remain very high on the list. And I think that there are very good deals, very good opportunities that can be brokered for countries of origin in a situation in which employers need labor in these sectors. Occupational shift of EU nationals into jobs previously dominated by migrants. We have seen in the agriculture sector in Germany, but there are many other examples on which I am working on with governments. Finally, shifts in demand for labor in manufacturing. That's quite interesting. I mean, the Green New Deal was proposing a reshoring of certain activities, and somehow the new economy after COVID will go in this direction. I mean, there will be an incentive to reshore by capital mobility, because there is a curve of international mobility. It's more difficult for factors of production to move, and by an increase of demand of manufacturing in certain goods and services in the new normal after COVID. We have seen it with PPE, with medical equipment. We see, let's say, we saw a degree of autarky somehow increased, and as it happened in other contexts, we expect that the new normal will be different from the situation of the world in 2019, so before the COVID crisis. I leave again the floor to Irina, hoping that something of what I said raised the attention of our audience. And thank you very much for giving me this chance.
Thank you, Andrea. Before leaving the floor to Irina, I would like to thank you for not only providing us with information, but also raising questions that policymakers may want to address in the coming months and years. For me, on behalf of the Prague Process Secretariat, it's of course important to ask what we can do in the Prague Process and how we could, in this intergovernmental migration dialogue, support countries in achieving better labor migration results in post-COVID times. Are there particular issues that you would recommend focusing on? And here I would maybe also like to bring up some issues that you have not mentioned and that are, of course, regular items of discussion in our workshops, such as the recognition of skills, or also the portability issues of social benefits, pension rights, and so forth. So with these questions, I hope to keep you busy until our participants also use the chat function and ask questions in English or Russian as they wish. And Thanks again for this interesting lecture. I think we can go ahead maybe with addressing these first questions, and then Irina will have some more time to prepare the others.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I hear three key words from you, and the first one is the importance of intra-regional cooperation among Prague Process members. I think that within this group of countries, which are from a cultural point of view, from an institutional point of view, also from a language point of view, they are somehow alike. And we see within this group of countries, we see some synergies that can be created among the 10 countries of destination that I used as an example. I took 3 countries of the Prague Process: Romania, Poland, and Czech Republic, because they're very high in the interest of all countries of origin around the world, and because they are creating somehow a diversification of visa entry system that makes opportunities. So again, the second 2 key words that you mentioned, which are the recognition of skills and the portability of social security benefit, of pension benefit mainly, I think that should be the content of, should be the substance of the box of intra-regional cooperation. And language similarities, a certain process of harmonization of the TVET systems. I mean, also I remember the critical work which is being done now by the ILO in the corridor between Ukraine and Poland on harmonizing the system, should be valorized in terms of substance for bilateral agreements. So again, a bilateral agreement by itself is an expression of intent. When we try to insert specific synergic interests, such as the recognition of skills and the portability of social security benefits contribution inside a bilateral agreement, we see that we are giving an instrument for employers and for public employment services in country of origin to cooperate, to make deals happen. And this cannot be possible in some countries, in some other countries of destination around the world, without the very important work that our countries, the Prague Process countries, are doing in the diversification of the visa system, especially in the creation of pragmatic, temporary visa schemes linked to employment.
Thank you. Irina, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Andrea. So we got a couple of questions already, and I'd like to invite our participants to raise additional ones. The chat is yours, so do not forget about that possibility, because there might be the only chance that you see Andrea on the screen in the summer, at least. So the first one comes from the IOM, Rabab, thank you for asking. You mentioned the language learning as a possibility for pre-departure. Could you elaborate on pre-departure measures that are or can or should be taken to maximize migrant labor market and integration outcomes in the countries of destination?
Yeah, thank you very much, Irina. It's very good to receive this question, especially by IOM, who has to find solutions, who has to find policy options, who has to find that has to find solutions, policy options for which are generally enough to be digested by countries which are very diverse. and countries with very different needs. When it comes to language barrier, let me, before jumping on the tools, let me look at what is the situation that I observe. The situation that I observe is that that the language issue is very different, so different at the point that it's very difficult to give a recipe that that benefits all. Okay, so it's very much the kind of language barrier solutions to language barrier has to be appraised in a specific corridor between two countries with establishments working a certain language and low-skilled, semi-skilled workers being able to communicate in another language. So not only country by country, but also by occupational family. So indeed, let me make a paradox example. A domestic worker migrating from my country of origin, from Italy to the UK, does not have the requirements of having to recite a Shakespeare sonnet as part of its working duty. So what are the first question before identifying the solution is what are the specific areas of language which are required for a specific job family? Because going back to the question of Alexander, the skills recognition framework is not made for the all occupational ladder, but it is made by occupational family. So very important on this. I mean, this is not to reply to our ION colleague. This is not an item for a handbook or for a manual. I mean, this is something that needs to be understood in the occupational family for which we are crafting a bilateral agreement or a skills recognition agreement. But I can elaborate further with specific examples. So please share my contact with the officer.
All right, and we have another question coming from Ketevan. Ketevan, thank you for asking. With regard to examples, maybe you can give a couple of examples on regularizations that were the most effective, assuming that labor market assessment be an essential part of the process.
Well, on this, I mean, I worked most of my life for a value-based organization, for the ILO. So the first implication is that amnesties and regularization make a lot of difference to the human beings who benefit from it, first and foremost. So, of course, every time that a regularization wave is performed, we have to link our soul with all the good news that this is brought to the life of migrants, because somehow this person is now existing in the countries, can be under the umbrella of the employment protection legislation, and we feel that that this benefits not only the migrant itself, but also the community in which the migrant is living. Usually, the amnesties that worked were the best were those that were combined with a change in the admission policy. So not only a regularization of the de facto situation, but also an immediate change, which is taking into account a system of incentives and deterrents that can change the situation in the future. First aspect. Second, the amnesties which work best were those also linked to employers-based systems, so to a system in which the migrant was able to find to be regularized based on a job available in in the labor market for him or for her.
Our participants are quite silent today. They're not raising many questions, but maybe I can raise one of my own. It's quite simplistic one, but it should maybe guide a few additional questions from the audience. If we imagine that there should be, of course, labor migration after the post-COVID, reality, we hope that the second wave will not come and there will be a return to the normality. Do you think that the countries would develop certain specific measures to drive and to cover the demand on the labor market that they need? Would there be some additional measures that they didn't have previously and that they would be developing right now, turning back to their experience of the COVID times?
Again, it's always very difficult to predict the future, but I think that the halt on the migration processes that we are experiencing now as a result of the COVID crisis can also increase the labor migration instrument that we have deployed so far. Very often, I want to reply saying that we don't know which kind of jobs that will demand it, but we know what matters across corridors. So migration corridor which is prepared and regulated in terms of skills recognition and testing before the departure is a migration corridor in which we are likely to experience less rematching, costly rematching placement once the migrant is in the destination. So what I expect is that if the international mobility is going to be more costly, there will be more means on the end of employers to invest in a migration which maximizing a good result. So a migration which is in which, for instance, we have a more sophisticated range of pre-departure services. Pre-departure services in which, as it happens often in Southeast Asia and in East Asia, a pre-departure service where the training done before the departure is also a way to test the migrants based on the specific needs of the employer in destination. This is quite effective because usually countries of origin, especially in North Africa, complain that they don't want to align their TVET systems to the needs of countries of destination. But when we have attitude and soft skills to be tested, so not only a specific vocational training skills, but the capacity to learn, the capacity to receive instruction and to work in certain workplaces is being tested, this has no implication for the alignment of the TVET system. So I would say a closer connection. I expect to experience a closer connection between not only states of origin and states of destination, but also between employers in origin countries and employment services and states in the country of origin. Irina, you're muted.
Thank you, Andrea, very much for replying to my question. So we got another couple of questions coming from Sultana. The first one, that's regarding the regularization of domestic workers, in particular nurses, babysitters, caregivers in the labor market. What procedures should be established to prevent irregular labor activities of this migrant in the Eastern Partnership countries?
Okay, the domestic work sector is a sector which is, I can see that it's a very elaborated questions by Saltanat, but I can see it in writing, so I can disassemble the question to give a precise answer. So first of all, the main difference between the domestic work sector, because it's a sector, it's not an occupation, and the other sectors when it comes to migration is the issue of accompanying costs, post-arrival accompanying cost. Why that is so critical for the prevention of irregular migration and the governance of the governance of the recruitment on the sector? Because the domestic worker ends up in not only in a workplace which is not standardized, as it can be a factory or a construction site, but it ends up in a workplace, a family, okay, where the chemistry of individual and community personalities can go either very well or very bad. What does it mean in practical terms? In practical terms, it means that the countries of destination must invest on accompanying costs. Accompanying costs are certain insurances, certain services of counseling, certain services of assistance that the public sector put in place to glue the matching between the domestic worker and the family. We have a very interesting evaluation study for two municipalities, the municipality of Milan and the municipality of Modena, which invested enormously in the year 2000 on accompanying service. So to deploy through association and trade unions, to deploy services to glue this matching or to rematching the domestic workers to other families based on personal characteristics. This is not done by the market. This is unlikely that is done by the market. It is very much in the interest of the community of the country of destination, because they want good matching of domestic workers. So it's a critical interest for the community of the country of destination, but as a matter of fact, it does not work very well where the recruitment is privatized, because it costs a lot. It costs more money than what the individual employers is likely to pay. For this reason, what happened after there was a cut of the local funds in these two municipalities, which jeopardized this accompanying cost for domestic workers? Well, if the public is not supporting rematching and accompanying, if for the private is not good value for money, all the domestic work markets received an incentive to go irregular. So So of course, the irregular migration, is likely to be cheaper for the family, who can also face a lower cost in case of a bad match. But this, I mean, of course, increase irregular migration. So the more we invest in accompanying cost, the less likely we are experiencing the situation of families looking for babysitters, elderly care workers, and other forms of domestic workers from the market. So again, this is a market failure, Irina. This is a very important point to grasp. The individual family cannot shoulder the cost of a bad match of a domestic workers recruited from outside, but the community as a whole can shoulder this cost. It is costly, but the more you gain experience in establishing a domestic worker recruitment channel, the more the risk diminishes and the overall cost for the society decreases. So you want, so to Sultanat, I would like to strengthen that the family recruiting a domestic worker should not be left alone, but there should be a community effort or a government effort to face this as a market failure, because never in the world these kind of costs are shouldered by the recruiter for the fact that the recruiters usually get its fee on the day in which the migrant takes employment in the country of destination. And this is not the day in which we face the problems of rematching. Thank you, Irina.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. I think it sounds very reasonable. I agree with you very much. And I think that's part of the integration process that starts when migrant comes to the country of destination, and there should be certain counseling that the community ensures. Therefore, the importance of the work of the local communities, of the municipalities is so acute today. So the next question comes from Ward. It's very difficult in terms of forecasting, I'd say, because I'm not sure whether you have any examples of that, regarding the agricultural migrants and the situation in the COVID-19 times. Those who couldn't leave the countries of origin, what other alternatives do they have for work in their countries of origin? Because they couldn't leave during the agricultural season to the countries of destination. So do you know any examples how they reshuffle throughout the labor market internally?
Yeah, very important question. The issue of sudden returns is being faced by many countries of origin. I'm working with 2 countries of origin, very large one, on the issue of managing returns, because you have to manage a sudden shock in the labor supply, in the labor supply of people who not only are being deprived by income, but also by people who usually have faced a very important cost to return home. So what we have experienced is that we have people that need to work because they need to repay the debt for having returned home because of COVID. So here, the key instruments that we are using are the usual one for effective implementation of unemployment solution. So we are talking about people who are national because they are going back to the country of origin. So first of all, we have to understand how these relate to the competition with those who were left behind, okay? So we are facing the same issues that we are facing in the context of return and reintegration of return and reintegration in many countries where there is a surplus of labor. I mean, I think now about government in West Africa, which had the political issue of not giving a preferential lane to returnees vis-a-vis those left behind. So first of all, I would reply to Lorian that we have an issue of political economy. We have to find a profiling system which avoids these kind of clashes of benefiting certain demographic groups vis-a-vis others, to benefit certain nationals vis-a-vis others. Second, how do you do that? I mean, you have to study who is coming back and when this person is coming back. The third is that we know that COVID-19 will not last forever. So, of course, we expect these returnees to be granted possibilities of re-emigration. So, usually we not only have the two policy options that we have in economic reintegration, which are retraining for formal jobs in the formal economy and entrepreneurship and social enterprise training for rural economies, but we also have a third one, a very important one, which is re-emigration, meaning trying to relink returnees with the job opportunities that they left in the country of destination or to similar ones. So what I recommend, and I'm working on this with a large government, to invest in profiling instruments. So to understand who is migrating, who is coming back, sorry. What are the usual, we call it the skills and employability map. So what are the possibilities that we can offer at home? And third, a new module on re-emigration. So how can we broker new possibilities for re-emigration, and how we can relink the returnee to his or her former job. So profiling. Second, there is the issue of targeting. So how do we ration? How do we target a limited number of opportunities for labor supply surplus, which just had a supply shock? I mean, on this, it is important to work on efficiency. So we should try to avoid models such everybody benefits from all, because we know very much that returnees are a very different group compared to the unemployed left behind. Usually they need very different service, and from this we can, and from profiling the needs in a correct way, we can also save a lot of money in services which are not tailored to the individualized needs of the returnee. So profiling and targeting, and then let's see what is the fiscal space to deploy solutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. That was a good reply. I think very elaborate. It's not an easy task to just name a few professions from which one individual could shift quickly. There should be a profiling system, targeting system in place, and the country of origin should also invest certain work into that. Thank you. We have a question from Emil Niculescu. He's asking, what should be the red line for a regularization campaign not to become a pull factor for regular immigration?
Irina, the question by Emil is a very important one, and very important one. And there are as many replies as there are contingencies in all over the world. So yes, indeed, an immediate benefit for the human beings benefiting from regularization campaign is very difficult to dismiss, because it relates to a very important very important outcomes for people who migrated irregularly 100% of the time without having an awareness of what they were going into. So, so first, there are human compassion benefits which cannot be dismissed. Second, there are very important benefits for employers, because in a situation in which there is Europe in a severe labor shortage crisis, they can get labor under the radar of legality and under the radar of the employment protection legislation. So, I mean, there are immediate benefits. When it does not act as a pull factor, this we should study case by case, and I think that it is important that again, when I try to give a reply to Emil, so it does not act as a pull factor in the moment in which the regularization is crafted, is enacted in the same moment in which there is a change in the regulation for future recruitment. Okay, so in the moment in which the regularization is an instrument also to promote a change in the admission policy, we are likely to avoid this pull factor effect again. But I mean, we should look at the situation not only at the national level but also in the local labor market.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your reply. I think that was the last question from our audience. I don't think any more questions. So I see that Alex already reappeared on his screen. I would like to turn to him back. Thank you, Andrea, from my side.
Yes, thank you. And also to the participants who asked their questions. Andrea, I think we have a lot of work ahead, and I think we will meet again in the Prague process. Let me also announce that after the summer break, we already have 2 webinars in our plans. One is also relating to what we're discussing today and shall be on the platform economy and migration. We will have our first speaker from April, who will return to our webinar format on 10th of September. And he will also have a paper issued within the Prague Process Migration Observatory in the coming weeks on this issue. The platform economy, according to this paper, is going to be very important in the future and is not properly regulated at many occasions. So we look forward to this future outlook into what might be migration in the future. Secondly, we also want to invite the European Commission to present its fitness check of the labor migration legislation at EU level, and we hope to do that also still in September. When it comes to the other activities of the Prague process, we are currently also looking into the development of an e-learning tool on labor migration, and we may reach out to Andrea at this particular occasion again. And we hope to also implement some of our face-to-face activities in autumn and towards the end of the year. Most importantly, we will have a senior officials meeting that is hosted by the German EU presidency in Nuremberg in November. And we are currently discussing whether this event on 16th and 17th of November will be taking place face-to-face or whether we will have to move to a remote mode of online conference. Other than that, I would once again invite you to look through our publications in the Migration Observatory and of course the webinar recordings. We will also upload the webinar recording of Andrea in the coming weeks. And we will share his presentation with all listeners in PDF and hope that you will then have the possibility to have a closer look at the various tables and indicators that Andrea presented. It was a very rich content and it was challenging to do it in such a swift and short presentation. But Andrea, thank you for making this effort. And I think we've all learned quite a lot today and also seen what our work should address in the future. So with this being said, I would like to invite the participants to fill out a short poll on today's presentation and today's webinar, which shall help us to improve in the future. We will probably continue with our webinar sessions also in autumn, depending also on COVID-19 developments. We hope to return to face-to-face meetings soon, but we are not certain whether this will be possible this year. We also plan to have several online trainings in the coming months, and we will keep you posted on these issues and of course hope for your participation in autumn again. With this being said, I would ask Julia to please share the poll on the evaluation of this webinar. I would like to thank you all for your attention and to Andrea specifically for his rich presentation, to our technicians and interpreter, and I wish you all a very good afternoon and also summer holiday in spite of the difficult circumstances we're living in. And with this being said, I thank you all and goodbye from Vienna.